Good morning and welcome to YASH's webinar on S4HANA deployment options, cloud on-premise. I'm Robert Melkonian. I'm the Vice President of SAP Solutions here at YASH. With me today is Justin Coleman, who's a Senior Solution Architect. As far as my background, I've been in the SAP space 20 plus years, initially as a FICO consultant and project and program manager, and now spend a lot of my time in pre-sales activities for YASH, where I've been for the last 5.5 years, based in the Boston area. Justin, how about an introduction?
Sure, thanks, Bob. My name is Justin Coleman. I'm a Senior S4HANA Solution Architect, both with on-prem and cloud versions. My background is primarily supply chain and logistics. I've been in the SAP space for about 15 years and have gone through several S4HANA on-prem implementations, as well as a senior solution architect for a very large chemical company that is moving to the public cloud. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
So thank you, Justin. So when we're going to go through the webinar, there'll be plenty of time at the end to respond to everybody's questions, but have your questions coming in. There's a little bar in the chat bar, and feel free to ask questions on an ongoing basis. Okay, so let's go see the agenda at this point. So what we want to cover today is YASH Technologies, who we are, a little bit of a corporate background, talk about the evolution of SAP. For those of us who've been around SAP a long, long time, it's certainly changed over the last couple of decades, and now going to the cloud is the continuous evolution. We want to talk about that a little bit. And then what Justin and I do a lot here, we talk to existing customers and prospective customers about the choices you have. This is not like 20 years ago where you basically had one choice. You have different choices now, different flavors depending on if you're an existing customer or a new to SAP customer, or what we call a greenfield implementation or net new implementation. So we want to spend a fair amount of time today talking about those choices, what the cloud is, what's a private cloud versus a public cloud, where SAP is going directionally in those areas. And with the technology changing, the methodology, most of you who've been in the SAP space a long time are probably familiar with ASAP methodology. We've all used it on implementations and projects, but SAP's latest methodology is Activate methodology. So we're going to focus on the new methodology and how best practices plays in there, and the role of best practices and the methodology. And finally, wrapping up with, so how do I kick this off? What are some of the tools and resources you can use? And then we'll have our wrap up and questions and answers. Okay. So let's spend a brief moment on YASH. YASH itself is a technology company with 20 years. We do have 4,500 employees globally, very strong presence in the US and India, and across 5 continents and 27 countries now. About half of our employees are involved heavily in the SAP space, and from an SAP standpoint, we offer a whole host of services, all the way from classic implementations and project management, all the way to managed services and support offerings where we support your production environment after you go live. So hosting has also been an area where we're focused on now, working with our partners such as Amazon Web Services. One of the other things we offer is pre-configured solutions or best practices model, which become much more important in the cloud environment. When I say cloud, basically SAP initially called it public cloud. They've changed the terminology to cloud, but for the most part, in today's discussion with myself and Justin, we'll be referring to cloud, assume it's public cloud. And I've already touched a little bit on the YASH SAP practice overview. So without any further ado, let's move on to the evolution of SAP. So with SAP, a lot of us have different experiences. As I said, I started 20 plus years ago in version 3.0 of R3. So, you know, it's come a long way, and now this is the next evolution of it, where it's, you know, those of us who did a lot of implementations back in the day, there was a lot of customizing, a lot of configuration, you know, a lot of requirements gathering. For the cloud version, that goes away. It's a different model, and Justin and I are going to be talking about what's different. And so we're not going to have an extensive HANA discussion here. All of you are probably familiar with HANA at this point. If you're not, we'd be happy to have an offline discussion about it. But the assumption is, you know, that HANA is the SAP platform that was introduced 4 or 5 years ago, right, Justin? I believe it was introduced in 2012. And now all their products are being developed on the HANA platform. And so we will be talking a little bit about the on-premise version as well as the cloud version. And one of the other key changes is, you know, looking at this slide is Fiori. So for those of us who loved, and you know, when I'm saying that half kidding, we love the SAP GUI, you know, Fiori is very different. It's tile-based. SAP transactions are being written in Fiori. I have a slide that shows it. And so that's as you see on this slide, Fiori is now your gateway, and all your transactions are being written in Fiori. Even your configuration is you're going to click on Fiori tiles. Even when you go to SAP best practices, they're in Fiori tiles. So that's the direction it's going. On the cloud, you don't have a choice. It's Fiori. On-premise, if for some reason you love the old GUI, you can use it, but you know, our experience has been user adoption is heavily tilted towards Fiori. And then HANA, as I mentioned, this is not a HANA session, but it is an in-memory. It fundamentally changes the game onto the way reporting is done, the table structures, and as I said, we'd be happy to have additional discussions either about Fiori or HANA or anything related to this after this webinar. And so, talked about Fiori. This is what it looks like. You know, you can see it's tile-based. It's by role, so users can program it, and SAP continually develops more and more of these tiles. And one of the areas different, especially, you know, myself being an old FICO consultant, a lot of financial reports now are just embedded in the Fiori tile. Analytics are embedded in the Fiori tile. So if you haven't heard of it or you haven't used it yet, you will be using it. With that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Justin, and I'll be involved commentating as well. But what we want to do here is level set on the differences between on-premise and the private cloud and the public cloud. But really, as I said, the focus, when we use the term cloud, for the most part, will be the public cloud today. Justin, do you want to start from this slide, and I'll be interjecting commentary as we go along?
Sure. Thanks, Bob. So let's talk a little bit about on-prem versus private cloud versus public cloud. On-prem and private cloud are essentially the same thing. The days of a server sitting in a room somewhere running are, you know, quickly dwindling. Companies don't want to spend the time, money, and resources to keep a system running. They would rather spend the time, money, and resources keeping their business running. So when you take an on-premise infrastructure landscape and you move that to a private cloud, such as Amazon Web Services, for example, you're really, you know, putting Amazon in charge of hosting your environment. What does that give you? That provides you, you know, peace of mind. It provides you what's called high availability in disaster recovery, which is a SAP term. So you don't have to worry about your systems going down. When you talk about on-prem and private cloud, there really is no difference in the application itself. HANA is the platform. S4 is the application. That's your suite. So you have the same amount and I would say accessibility to customization with an on-prem version as you would with private cloud. You own it. You own the system, you own the software, you own the configuration, the custom coding. But again, custom coding and custom configuration for on-prem is something that companies are not wanting to do as much as the old days of ECC, where you spent millions and millions of dollars customizing your solution just to make it work for yourself. Nobody wants to do business with an island. And over the past 40 years and tens of thousands of customers, SAP has developed these best practices, which when you move to the public cloud, SAP starts you off with a best practice system. Embedded best practices, embedded analytics, it's out-of-the-box functionality, you activate it. So when you talk about public cloud, one of the primary differences between public and private is the fact that there is not a lot of customization configurations.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key points that we talked to a lot of prospects about this. That's a key decision point. Whether you're new to SAP or an existing, especially for existing clients, is which direction are you going to go? And then I know some of you may have heard of a hybrid approach too, but directionally it's, as Justin likes to say, it's two different flavors of ice cream, right? So that's one of those early decision steps. And towards the end, we'll show you some of the tools you can use to help in that process. So let's move on to the next slide. We're going to have several of these. So the next one is depicting the S4HANA Cloud Edition, and some of the things that Justin mentioned here. And so standardization, the native integration with the other SAP. So this becomes your platform. The governance Justin mentioned. So in this case, you're out of the hardware business, right? The hardware is at SAP essentially. And we'll talk about the releases sections. And one of the other key areas here is guided configuration. So if you go to an on-premise model, whether it's on-premise or on a private cloud, for existing customers, it's not going to feel that much different because you still have, those of you who are familiar with SAP, the IMG, and you can go in and configure. The real difference is when you go to the public cloud solution. It's just apples and oranges. Anything you'd like to add to this slide, Justin?
Just when you get into the decision-making process and you want to pick which is a better fit for your company, you have to look at the releases that come out. One of the key considerations to take in effect is when you move to public cloud is you get 4 releases a year, and you have to plan release strategy. So it's no more developing custom code, it's planning for the releases that SAP pushes out.
And we have a slide that shows the schedule upcoming too.
Yep.
Okay,
Next slide.
Yep. Okay, and so this is a little bit about YASH and the SAP HANA Public Cloud Lighthouse program. So YASH itself was one of the early adopters of the public cloud. We've implemented it ourselves for our consulting team. So we're public, not only are we a partner on the public cloud, we're a customer. So we get the joys and benefits of both sides of that experience. And, as a Lighthouse partner, there are certain specific benefits. There's only a handful of consulting entities who are Lighthouse partners right now. And, we participate in the advisory council, have access to us and our customers for special training, and, are heavily involved with SAP's development as needed as well. Okay, so the next question, and this is a key one, we're going to spend a fair amount of time here, is so now that we know we're going to S4HANA, as most of you have probably heard, SAP is going to stop supporting their current ECC releases in 2025. So this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, where you've got to go in and look at your deployment options and the roadmap, and from what Justin and I deal a lot with customers is we're involved early on in developing your own personal roadmap directionally. How do you get there, right? It's like planning any sort of trip. And I can't emphasize how, this is an area where don't shortcut it. Understand what, it could be transformative to your organization, the impact from change management, the impact on data. Spend time in planning your journey. It's a key element. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit. We're going to be going through this. So there's different choices of deployment. We've touched on this. We're not going to spend too much time on the hybrid scenario, but there's the on-premise edition. And as we mentioned, the on-premise, for those of you who are existing customers, will feel, other than the Fiori and, obviously there's been a lot of table changes, platform changes, reporting changes, but to a large extent, you can do functionality that you can do now, you can do customization you can do now. The cloud innovation, as Justin mentioned, is different, right? It's designed with standardization in mind. You have to make sure you're comfortable with standardization in mind. And to a large extent, you need to determine, do you really need the customization that's on the on-premise, or will the cloud in a best practices model? And as Justin mentioned, every 3 months, there's new functionality coming out and improved. Will that satisfy you, and will the standardization, be a net benefit, which a lot of customers feel, yep, it's a net benefit because, I don't need to host. It's an easier model. So this is a kind of a key area. And here's the cloud roadmap. Justin, why don't you take over on this slide, if you don't mind?
So for the cloud, and again, we're just going to assume that cloud is public cloud. So this is SAP's roadmap. Each release is started by the year and the date that it's released. So 1708 is August of 2017, and it goes all through the next August release, which is 2018. So SAP plans and innovates for the next year. But when you look at the roadmap, when you look at these releases, it's planned functionality. It doesn't mean just because they have it on a scope detail that it's going to be. Typically about 4 to 6 weeks before release comes out is when they nail it down and they finalize it. And what does that do? That enables you, if you are on the cloud or considering to go to the cloud, it enables you to prepare for the release. What happens is SAP will push this release out into your queue box. So let's talk about the landscape for a minute. You get a 2-tiered landscape, quality and production, Q and P. So no more development, okay? So everything gets pushed into your queue box, and you have 2 weeks to test the release. If you don't want to test the release, you don't have to test the release. It will get moved into production regardless if you test it or not. That's one of the things to consider. That's why the release planning and release strategy is critical to the organization's success. So when you talk about the releases, the feature functionality that's in the scope details, like I said, is solidified about 4 to 6 weeks before the release comes out. Gives you time to prepare, gives you time to organize, gives you time to look at the new scope enhancements and bounce those up against what you already have currently in your system. So you only have to test those new enhancements that are coming out. Put it to you another way. If you're a process manufacturer, you probably don't have to test too much about discrete manufacturing, okay? It's just, one's not applicable to the other, and vice versa. If you're a discrete manufacturer, you probably don't have to test, master recipes for your production. So that's a little bit about the releases. If you want to go on to the next slide.
Yep. Okay, so we're not going, this is more of a referential slide. We'll go through this a little bit, but you can see this is, I like this slide. It's a good comparison to the on-premise versus the cloud. The other factor to be kept in mind, Solution Manager does play an important role, especially on the cloud. It's almost, it's best practices combined with Solution Manager, combined with active methodology. We're going to introduce a term towards, as we talked about methodology, called Fit2Standard. So that's a different way of executing these projects, but it's, the three-legged stool is, the cloud with Solution Manager best practices, and fit to standard. We'll probably, hit you over the head with that a couple of more times as we're going through. So this is a good comparison, as Justin has mentioned. Even things like the infrastructure, the on-premise, a lot of us are used to the sandbox, dev, Q, and P. Not the case anymore in the pure cloud, right? And so there is an Activate roadmap and Activate methodology. There are two flavors of Activate. There's an on-premise flavor and a cloud flavor. There's a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of differences. So, not to belabor the point, directionally, when you go cloud or on-premise, it's usually either or. You can do a hybrid and an evolutionary model. Those are those two, but generally you're going to tilt or lean towards one or the other. Anything else you want to add to this one, Justin?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. So this is a standard slide. Some of you may have seen it. So this is another question that you need to kind of answer yourself, especially for existing customers, right? Is do we do a net new implementation if we're an existing customer, or greenfield implementation, or do we do a system conversion / migration? And really, there's no easy answer to that, but I actually have a good slide. It's not in this presentation that depicts some of the criteria you should use for that. So, meaning what? So if I've been doing SAP for 12 years, 14 years, I didn't like my implementation to begin with. The processes are broken. I'm not comfortable with the processes. I want to redesign my cost center structure. I want to redesign my chart of accounts. Well, then I would say, then you lean towards being a new implementation or greenfield, as we say, client, even if you're an existing SAP client. However, if you're happy with, the processes you have, you want to impact a little less impact on the business, then you look at doing a technical conversion. And there's different tools, there's different templates that SAP has delivered to do that. And both of these will impact your business. One will impact it more than the other. The feedback I've received from SAP as of about a month or 2 months ago, the trend for existing customers is about 60% are doing system conversions and about 40% are doing net new implementations on S4HANA. Landscape transformation, that's more if you've got a multi-mixed instances, you've got multiple instances, you've got 5 global instances, you've evolved, and or you might have non-SAP. So that's consolidation. The most common solution I've seen for that, for those of you who have a finance background as well, SAP has a deployment strategy called Central Finance, which allows you to keep your existing landscapes in place, but to consolidate from a financial reporting on a new S4HANA instance. So we're not going to talk about that in this session, but if anybody's interested, I've got plenty of content, and we've done, YASH has a lot of experience in that area. Just remember, it's Central Finance, which allows you to do your landscape transformation. And then the other item related to landscape transformation is an S4HANA migration. So these are your customer choices. Do your analysis. We'll talk about some of the tools towards the end that will help in initiating which way you should go directionally. But really, there's 2 decision points, right? For the most part, is am I going to be majority on-premise, or am I going to be majority on cloud? And if I am, how am I getting there? Justin, anything else you want to add at this point?
No, thanks.
So what we did here is, this is an example for cloud for a small to mid-sized company. So it's a little bit different than the on-premise. So we just want to add and give it a little bit of flavor on this. And what we're also finding out with cloud customers, although it's newer technology, a lot of times you won't need all full-time functional people. It lends itself to more of a remote and part-time orientation, where potentially your architects are going to come in to do more of the Fit2Standard, which Justin is going to talk about shortly up front. But then they go away because a lot of this work can be done remotely. So we're finding that there's a fair amount of stuff that can be done remotely, and you're not bringing in the buses of consultants as much as you were in the old days to do old-fashioned ECC implementation. So this would be the structure of a team in a typical, small to mid-size, and you can see, you've got test management, the data migration, the integration, and below the application, you've got finance, sales, manufacturing, and analytics. Not that much different. What you're not going to need is a lot of bases, using the SAP term, or hardware. Those skills are going to be a little different. They'll be involved more in security design up front. You'll need some for the initial, but after go live, you don't have the hardware. It's at SAP. It's hosted, and every 3 months, as Justin mentioned, you'd be getting the releases. It'll impact the team structure and the model. And the next one is on a bigger cloud project organization. So we wanted to put these in as kind of a representative sample of these templates that we've seen and that SAP has recommended. So now we want to spend some time on, okay. So Bob and Justin, yep, we get it. It's a little bit different. The technology is different. How the resource mix is probably a little different. So we know we've got different deployment options, on-premise, cloud. I can migrate it, I can do a greenfield, but what about how do we actually execute that? And for this section, we're going to talk about Activate methodology, Fit2Standard, best practice, and I'm going to turn it over to Justin here.
Sure, thanks, Bob. So traditionally, when you implement SAP the old way, you ran with ASAP methodology, and ASAP is a traditional waterfall type of approach. When you get into Activate methodology, it's an agile Scrum type of approach. It combines different flavors of accelerated RDS, rapid deployment solutioning, to quickly implement and stand up your system. One of the biggest differences between ASAP and Activate is blueprinting. With ASAP, you would have to blueprint to build your system, right? So you take a bunch of business requirements, you configure those business requirements, and you build your solution, okay? And then you test the solution that you built, and you do a fit gap analysis. For Activate, there is no blueprinting. And, it sounds a little harsh, but when you move to the cloud and you're adopting best practices, I don't really care about your as-is processes. They're gone, all right? What you're adopting is best practices, best of breed, standard processes. So, companies like to think that they're different, that they're unique. And it's true, maybe some companies have, a special sauce here and there, but the way you take, for example, order to cash, customer puts in an order, you got to fulfill that order and then bill the customer to get paid, right? Probably not that different across a chemical company to a discrete manufacturing company to a distribution company. It's not that different. Order to cash is not going to be that different. So Activate methodology is really, in the blueprint, goes away. And the Activate methodology is an accelerated methodology that has tools, templates, and accelerators to quickly implement your solution. Another key difference is the starter system. So when you go to cloud, you get a starter system day one, okay? The starter system has preloaded like data, and I say like data because it's not your data, but if you're a manufacturing company, you're not going to get professional services data, okay, or financial services data. You're going to get manufacturing data. It's like your data. So You start with the starter system day one, and what does that do? That gives you and your users a chance to go in. It's like a little sandbox. You can go in, you play around, you get familiar with Fiori, you get familiar with the new UX experience, you get familiar with the analytics that are built in. You're just getting familiar with the system. Okay. You also use the starter system as part of your Fit2Standard workshops. So you can demonstrate the functionality. Let's go back to order to cash. So you can demonstrate the order to cash scenario in the Fit2Standard. And what it does is it allows you to visualize the process. So an order to cash scenario can be extended. It's called extensibility. If, for example, you need to generate a document on step 3 and the best practice has you generating a document on step 5, you can extend that business process to accommodate, where you need to generate a document or an output. Okay. So let's go on to the next slide. All right. So in each phase of Activate, there are tasks and deliverables. Again, tools, templates, and accelerators. The tools that you get for Activate is you get a pre-loaded project plan. You download it. It's already in Excel. And in this project plan, the lowest level detail of the project is the tasks. And these tasks have to be fulfilled for each phase of the project: prepare, explore, realize, and deploy. As you can see in prepare, prepare really kicks off Activate, but there's a whole phase 0 of the project, planning. So you have to plan before you can even jump into the prepare phase. It's not shown on this screen, but it is a very, very crucial part of the project. But you can see in prepare, you already get the initial system. That's called your modeling, your starter system or your model company. Okay. When you go into explore, you realize after you do your Fit2Standard, you realize the best practices in your Q box. Okay. When you do your testing against your best practices, the testing's embedded. So again, it's an accelerator, right? Test no more HP, Quality Center. It's all the testing is embedded. Your test scripts are written for you. You just basically have to fill in the blanks for your data, what kind of data you're going to use, what kind of output you're going to be generated in each process. And you look at the Fit2Standard analysis in your Q box, and you do an iteration. So you do 1 or 2 iterations to say, yeah, these processes are going to work. No, we need to extend this process and enhance it a little bit. And that's where the extensibility comes in. Okay. I'm not going to go through the realize and deploy. I think, everybody on the phone here understands what realize and deploy means. But again, the whole Activate methodology to implement a $1 billion corporation, you can get this up and running, in 26, 28 weeks. All right. So this is a little deeper Cloud Activate methodology slide. This basically shows when the starter system gets in place, when the quality system gets brought up, and then your production system. Again, 2-tier landscape. So you're going to have overlap. Your Q box is going to be realized after your Fit2Standard workshops are near completion. Okay. You go into your Q box, you activate, quote unquote, activate the best practices. So you don't have to go into the IMG. In fact, you don't have access to the IMG. You have guided configuration and expert configuration that you perform after the Fit2Standard workshops have been completed, or during the Fit2Standard workshops. Guided configuration is self-enabled configuration that the leads or the primes on, the architects on the project do to set it up. Expert configuration is when you need a little more juice or a little more customization to a process, and you kick that over to SAP. And what they'll do is they'll go ahead and tailor the process. Not too much. It's not code. It's not anything like that. But they tailor it a little more deeply than you could, and they push that back to you. And that's all handled through Soulman. Next slide, please. All right. So we're going to talk about deployment options, cloud versus on-prem, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob for this one. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost the screen. Sorry, that was I was reading off the wrong screen. I don't know why it went out. Sorry. Purpose of Fit Gap. Fit Gap is old methodology. It's your more traditional ASAP methodology. It's performing, a fit to a process and doing a gap or a delta analysis of anything that falls out, right?
For those of you familiar with the old ASAP methodology, it takes the place of requirements gathering,
right,
as opposed to it. So it's because and this is the example where you talking about is for the cloud. So let's reinforce that, right?
Yes.
This is for the cloud. Because the cloud is delivered with best practices, in essence, these best practices and the standard processes are what you're going to implement. So the Fit Gap workshops is the first step to validate that these best practices and these processes will work for your business. So it turns as opposed to the consultants coming with a pad of paper and saying, tell me about your requirements, that's not the model here. The model
right.
here is, here's how the system is going to work. The consultants are going to walk you through these structured workshops to make sure it'll satisfy. And there's a way of capturing any, additions that may or may not be needed. But the intent is not to come in and grab your requirements and try to do everything under the sun, customized.
Well,
just the opposite. Go ahead.
Yeah. So let's get this. Let's just get the terminology correct here for everybody so you guys can understand it. Fit Gap is when we talk about on-prem solutions. Okay. So when you do an on-prem S4HANA, you're referring to Fit Gap. When you talk about cloud, it's Fit2Standard. Okay. Because you own the S4 suite, when you have on-prem, that's where you can do your Fit Gap. That's where you can do your customization. You can do your coding. You can rebuild the engine if you want. In cloud, it's Fit2Standard. You're adopting a best practice. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, why won't this best practice suit my need? Right? Order to cash.
I think we have a slide on that. I'm going to go to it right there.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go back.
Yep. So a Fit2Standard, again, tools, templates, and accelerators. When you get into S4, you can see the process diagram has already been created for you. I'm going to use order to cash again, procure to pay. All right. All those processes have already been spelled out for you. All the test scripts already done. Okay. Customer presentations and PowerPoints already completed. You don't have to build any of this. Okay. That goes into your RDS, Rapid Deployment Solution, to implement the cloud. When we talk about Fit Gap, it is totally on-prem. You have to create, because you're customizing a process, you have to create the process flow, you have to create the test scripts, you have to create the PowerPoint presentations, you have to create all these templates that you're going to use as part of your deliverables for the project, okay? Your user training documents, everything, you have to build that.
Yeah, I think the key word is standardization, right?
Standardization, commonality.
Yep. That's the key word.
Yep.
So let's go. So this is the Activate cloud deployment experience. We've been talking about this, but this is a good summary one. And going left to right, Justin's mentioned, you can actually experience a trial for free on it, just to get your feet wet. And along the left, we have all the different support tools that you can use in SAP, right? Between the best practices and some configuration tools, and the migration cockpit. So if you're ready for standardization, you want to go in the direction of the cloud and say, this is what I want. This is directionally, as Justin said, unless you've got incredible amounts of secret sauce, this is the trend. I would say from a business standpoint, and not only that, but this is how SAP is driving their company as well, with the expectations that a lot of customers will be going towards a cloud and the SaaS model. Mm-hmm. And these are the phases, as we've mentioned. Anything else you want to add on this slide, Justin?
Just each part of each part of the project, or the phase of the project, I should say, you have to stick to the deliverables and the tasks. If you don't complete the deliverables when you're rolling out Activate, it's not going to work. You can't go from an Activate methodology to an ASAP methodology. I've been on a project where project manager hit a couple hurdles, didn't really understand how Activate worked, and reverted back to ASAP. Project failed. Plain and simple. It does not work.
But that was before YASH.
That was before YASH. That was not with YASH. That was before YASH. But it does not work. So the main point here that I'm trying to make is Activate is a methodology. It's a philosophy, and you have to embrace it. If you don't embrace it and you don't live it and breathe it, it's not going to be successful for you or your organization.
Okay, and so this is a good slide that shows, kind of putting everything back together. So go ahead, Justin. Let's walk everybody through this.
So let's talk about, I keep saying this 3 things over and over again, is tools, templates, and accelerators. What does that mean? This breaks it down. Tools, templates, and accelerators are part of the building blocks for Activate. All right, what's a building block? Well, you first start out with a model company. That's your starter system. Best of breed processes, data in the system. It's plug and play. I mean, you turn the key, it's ready to go, right? Turnkey solution. You then have migration, which is your data package, your data set. There's master data management and MDG, master data governance, built into S4 that allows you to quickly transform and harmonize your data. There's a consolidation of tables, there's a consolidation of coding in S4 that greatly reduces by half of what ECC has. What does that do? Makes the system effective and efficient. And then you go into the integration content. So how are we going to integrate all this, our data, our best practices into our new solution? Well, there's accelerators built in that allow you, and tools built into the S4 suite that allow you to take your model company or the best practices after you do the Fit2Standard, the data, after your data has been harmonized, put that into a big blender and spit out your solution very, very quickly, right? The tools that we talk about for guided configuration is the self-service configuration. I think it's called SSCUI. Yes. And the self-service configuration is customer enabled. It's clicking radio buttons and activating a scenario. Best practices are the lowest level building block in Activate. Okay, so a best practice is defined by a code or an SID, scope ID, and they roll up into a scenario. I gave you an example before: order to cash, another one's procure to pay, plan through produce, et cetera, right? You combine all that together and it rolls up into the Activate methodology, which you can see the final block here. All these different blocks that you build the foundation of your S4 platform roll up into the Activate. And if you do not deliver these tasks or complete these tasks, you're not going to have a rapid deployed solution, and you're not going to be successful with your project.
Thanks, Justin. So we already touched on the Fit2Standard, which is the term you'll hear a lot with the cloud, and these are the workshops that will be executed. And we've already touched on these to a large extent. And as Justin said, the building blocks are your best practices that roll up, and then there's a good example. So, and of the accelerators. So tools, templates, accelerators. It's a whole approach. It's a whole methodology, and as I mentioned, aligned with Solution Manager and aligned with Activate and best practices. So what we want to also talk about is the other term you're going to hear, and this is specific to the cloud, is the extensibility capabilities. The classic extensibility is on-premise, but the term extensibility that we'll hear more and more is a term more associated with the cloud. There's a couple of types of extensibility, so Justin can walk us through the in-app versus the side-by-side. But these are things like if you want to change screens, titles, things like that. But Justin, why don't we give another example of one?
So Bob talked about Fiori applications, which are tiles. A lot of these tiles are called live tiles. Live tiles means you constantly have a stream of data flowing through the tile. You can customize these tiles, quote unquote, customize these tiles to reflect on type of analytics that you want to see on your mobile device, on your tablet or PC, whatever you're using to access your system. You can also configure these tiles or customize these tiles for different views. They're called CDS views. That's one flavor of it. The next flavor is the side-by-side extensibility. That's where you build a process next to a best practice process. That is really getting into changing and manipulating some of the system a little deeper level. I don't like to go there. I don't like to really talk about side-by-side extensibility. SAP doesn't really like to talk about side-by-side extensibility. In fact, moving forward, side-by-side extensibility probably will not be around that much longer. It's really going to be for cloud. It's really going to be best practice. It's really going to be the in-app extensibility. One quick thing I want to talk about, just touch on, is we talk about analytics and embedded analytics, right? The difference between analytics and reporting is history. As soon as you pull a report that took a long time to generate in the old ECC environment, it's history, okay? It's yesterday's news. Analytics is real time. So you can consistently get real-time data for a specific type of financial document for your sales, AP, AR, whatever you need, just using that as an example, rather than pulling a report and having a meeting on that report that's a day old or 2 days old. So that's the big difference between the embedded analytics and the reporting side of this.
Thanks, Justin. And so here's kind of implementation and key considerations. We want to do a little compare and contrast. And you can see it is different. The old ECC way versus the cloud way of the 4 mandatory quarterly releases. The Activate versus ASAP methodology, number of tiers tend to be smaller and more agile teams and tend to be quicker, and as opposed to gap fit, a fit to standard approach. So it's a different way of doing business. So we're getting to the last section here before we get to our questions, tools and resources. So this is just some of our personal experience. There's a couple of tools from SAP that I would recommend anybody who wants to start their HANA journey that they use these tools, and they're no cost, so they are free. So the first one that's fairly commonly used is called a BSR, or Business Scenario Recommendation. And so, you can do this yourself, or YASH can do it for you, however you'd like it. And so what it is basically, you would run an input in Excel spreadsheet. SAP will look at your system based on your past usage and activity. And within 5 business days, roughly, they will generate a PDF report, and I'm showing you a sample page example, is saying, okay, in this case, the general ledger has a 91% relevance to you. Here's the impact HANA will have on it. So it kind of gives you a good representation on what you're using and the impact of HANA on your current as-is processes. Have to be in SAP. These are not outside of SAP. This is specific to SAP. The other one so the first one is BSR. The second one, and this is newer, is a readiness check. This seems to have a little more functionality, a little more robustness than the BSR, at least from my perspective. So this readiness assessment, or RA. So the two acronyms, and I know we all have a lot of acronyms in SAP, have BSR, or Business Scenario Recommendations, or Readiness Check, RC, or I've seen it also called RA. And so here's some of the aspects, some of the prerequisites. You know, it's recommended you do it through Solution Manager. You can do it without Solution Manager, but it's recommended you go through Solution Manager. And it creates this dashboard of 5 areas. So, you know, the recommended Fiori apps, the add-ons, the HANA sizing, impact of custom code, and some of these transactions that could be replaced. So and this is also free of cost, free of charge. So who's ever starting these, and so a lot of times Justin and I get called into customers and say, hey, come in, please help us with our strategy and a roadmap. A lot of times before we even show up to the customer's site, we'll say, well, have you run the BSR? Have you run the readiness assessment? Because this gives us some visibility where you are on your current as is, and it helps in your decision making about where you should be going direction. Okay, and so there's some examples. I want to just do a time check here of the readiness check, and you know, this is just kind of the guidance and some of the other steps you can do. Build your case using SAP has another tool called the Transformation Navigator, where you can go pick in which industry in, where you are, and it helps in developing a roadmap and based on the business processes you have. Okay. And last but not least, some helpful links and websites of where to find some information on the areas we've talked about today.